In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars, they chose the wrong person to provoke, and by the time they realized, it was already too late. Aspen Creek lay cradled between rolling mesas and the skeletal remains of tangled sagebrush, a hamlet so small that passing stagecoaches sometimes overlooked it entirely. Its wooden homes leaned at odd angles, their peeling paint whispering stories of better days. A solitary railroad track, sun-bleached and rusted, bisected the Main Street Township Road, the only sign that order had ever been dreamed here. Beyond, the desert stretched unbroken, an expanse that devoured livestock and wayward travelers with equal appetite. Jebediah Crow was a man shaped by silence. He had come to Aspen Creek years ago, dragging a past cluttered with grief and regret like a weary hound. He owned little more than the ramshackle homestead on the outskirts and a herd of scrawny cattle that the land begrudgingly fed. His face was etched by wind and worry. His eyes, the pale blue of morning frost, rarely betrayed the storms inside him. Crow spoke seldom, preferring the measured cadence of horses' hooves on hard earth to the brittle echo of human voices that it was on. The evening of the second harvest moon when he found her, an apparition on the horizon, a lone woman stumbling beneath a tattered shawl. She wore no traveling pack, no provisions to speak of. Her gait was unsteady, as though each footfall was an effort of will. Crow watched from his porch as she crossed the dusty field, kicking up clouds of ochre. The way she held herself stooped. One moment, arms outstretched, the next spoke of disorientation, not injury. Under a sky bruised purple by the setting sun, Crow approached her slowly, every step deliberate. The woman turned at the sound of his foot on the porch boards. Her eyes amber and wide fixed on him with a mixture of wonder and fear. "Ma'am," Crow said, voice low and gravel rough, "you look like you've wandered out of a nightmare. This ain't the place to be lost." He offered a hand, calloused. "And sure, name's Crow, Jebediah Crow." The woman blinked, her brows knitting together as if trying to recall the shape of her own name. She accepted his hand with a tentative grip, her skin papery thin. I don't know," she whispered, voice hoarse. "I can't remember." Her lips trembled, and Crow felt an ache bloom in his chest, a kinship born of shared emptiness. He brought her inside the small cabin, its single room illuminated by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. The air smelled of dried herbs and old leather, a scent Crow had come to find comforting. He guided her to a creaking chair by the hearth and fetched water from a chipped basin. "Drink," he said gently. "You'll need strength if you're going to make sense of things." She sipped, eyes never leaving his face. I remember a house. Warm wood, laughter, but then nothing." She swallowed hard, tears brimming in her eyes. "Who am I? Where did I come from?" Crow hesitated. The questions were heavy, too heavy for the quiet man to ask, yet she needed someone to bear them. Whatever had brought her here, fate, chance, or some darker force, Crow resolved to see her through this bewilderment. The desert nights were merciless, and a lone woman with no past was an invitation for every kind of trouble. He wrapped a threadbare blanket around her shoulders. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "At dawn, we'll ride into town. Folks'll want to know why a stranger's out wandering the plains. Maybe someone's come looking for you." But as the moon rose and the wind sifted through the jingle of the porch chimes, Crow felt something shift in the air. Beneath the hush of crickets, he heard faint hoofbeats, too deliberate, too measured to belong to any common traveler. His jaw tightened, and he glanced at the woman, whose head lolled against his shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her dot in that moment. Crow understood why legends linger in places like Aspen Creek, because the past never truly dies, it waits, patient as shifting sands for the moment it can strike again. He rose and moved to the window, peering into the gloom. A silhouette emerged beyond the lantern light, a rider, cloak drawn tight, face hidden. The horse's breath puffed in the cold air, steam curling like ghostly fingers. Crow's hand fell to the Winchester slung at his back. The woman stirred, blinking awake. "Mr. Crow?" she asked, voice small. He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed a finger to his lips and slid open the window. "Who's there?" A voice called from the darkness, rough, edged with impatience. "Show yourself." Crow felt the woman's breath hitch against his neck. He whispered, "Stay behind me." Then he stepped into the beam of the lantern. The rider reined back, horse's hooves scrabbling in the dirt. "Jebediah Crow?" the voice asked. "Depends on who's asking," Crow replied, every muscle coiled. A second figure emerged from the night. Two men, lean, dangerous, blazed into the lamplight. Recognition sparked in Crow's eyes, the scars on the taller man's cheek, the cold flicker in the other's gaze. Men he once thought forgotten. The woman clutched the blanket tighter, her eyes widening as Crow squared his shoulders. He thought of her questions, who she was, where she came from, and realized the answers would have to wait. First, he would answer those men's questions. And by dawn, neither the townsfolk of Aspen Creek nor the two strangers would know which legend they had awakened. To be continued. Part 2 coming next. Crow's fingers trembled around the hammer of his Winchester, the cold metal a stark contrast to the heat rising in his chest. The two men in the lantern's glow didn't flinch. If anything, they straightened, stepping into the pool of light, as if inviting the confrontation. The taller of the pair, a lean man with a charcoal scar cutting across his left cheek, spat into the dirt. "Crow," he said, voice low as gravel. "Never thought fate'd bring you back this way." Crow's jaw clenched. "You shouldn't have come." "Maybe," the scarred man admitted, dark eyes glinting. He gestured to his companion. "Matani. Here thinks you owe him." The other man, Matani, nodded once, nostrils flaring. He was shorter but broader, his stance a silent promise of violence. "He saved you once, Jeb," Matani said. "Time to return the favor." Crow stared at them, silhouette rigid beneath the lamp. He thought of the woman inside, Adrienne. He had begun to call her in his mind, safe for the moment by the hearth. She sat trembling, wide-eyed, the shawl wrapped tight around her slender frame. He hadn't yet given her a name. Hers would come once, she remembered. But first, he had to face ghosts he thought long buried. "What do you want?" Crow asked, voice steady. "I'm no bounty, no lawman." Scarred Pike, Crow wanted to call him, smirked. "A reckoning." He pushed his horse back, forcing it to scrape the porch planks. "You left us to die." Matani's hand drifted to a colt at his hip. "Left us bleeding, too." Crow felt the weight of their accusation slice through him. Years ago, in another town on a night drenched in blood, his path had crossed theirs. He'd walked away believing he was saving himself. They had chosen vengeance, he had sought peace. But peace had a way of slipping through one's fingers like sand. "Not tonight," Crow said. "She's with child." The words spilled from him before he realized. Adrienne, she hadn't said it aloud, but he'd seen the faint swell to her frame. Fear fluttered in his chest for reasons beyond his own safety. Pike snorted. "No more excuses." He stepped forward, the lantern light dancing across the barrel of his rifle. Crow shifted, Winchester at the ready. "Go away." His voice was command, but the two men remained, stubborn as tumbleweed. Inside, Adrienne's breath hitched. Crow turned his head slightly. 2 bullets would rip through that door if things went south. He clenched his teeth. He had nowhere left to run. Outside. Pike paused, expression flickering. Memories must have clawed at him, shots fired in a deserted street. Matani's anguished cry. Crow's silhouette swallowed by the night. Matani jutted his chin, grinding the moment into dust. "We came for blood." Crow exhaled, slow as winters. "Dawn. Then don't waste the moon. Aim true." Pike's finger twitched on the trigger guard. The horse stamped. Adrienne's cry cut through the tension. Crow wheeled, Winchester level. "Stay down!" Adrienne shrank back, pressing into the shadows. Her amber eyes wide with terror. Crow's heart thundered. Adrienne, helpless in the crossfire, was his fulcrum. He shouted to the dark, "If you step closer, she dies." His voice cracked like a whip across the porch. Silence pressed in. Stars blinked overhead, indifferent. Then Pike laughed, a harsh, single note. "Is that a promise?" Pike called. "Or a bluff?" Crow's knuckles whitened. The world contracted to the space between his barrel and Pike's chest. Droplets of sweat formed at the scar's edge. Adrienne's breathing echoed behind him. Matani's rifle lowered inch by inch. Crow prayed Pike's next decision would spare her. But fate had never been kind to those who begged for mercy. And in that fragile heartbeat, as Colt met Winchester, Crow realized that the night would demand more than bullets. It would demand a choice whose cost none of them could yet measure. 2. Be continued. Part 3 will pick up exactly here, no scene skipped. And in that fragile heartbeat, as Colt met Winchester, Crow realized that the night would demand more than bullets. It would demand a choice whose cost none of them could yet measure. Lenora Vale's breath caught in her throat. Somewhere in the dim glow of the cabin, she had fallen into a half-sleep, nightmares chasing the edges of her dreams. Now reality cut through the haze like a jagged blade. She heard voices urgent, laced with threat, each word pounding in her chest. Crow's warning echoed behind her, "Stay down." But Lenora felt her legs coil with the need to act. She pushed herself from the chair, shawl slipping from her shoulders, and moved toward the door. Each step a tremor of fear and determination shot through blurred vision. She saw the lantern cast dancing shadows across Crow's lean frame. His rifle was leveled, fingers ghosting the trigger. The two men across the porch, Pike and Matani, stood rigid, faces so familiar yet twisted with betrayal. Lenora's heart pounded against her ribs. Like a wild horse, Pike's voice cut through the clamor. "You think you can bluff us with a woman and a threat?" He spat into the dirt, disdain sharpening his tone. "This ain't a refuge, Crow." Crow's pale eyes didn't waver. "It is tonight. Step another foot and she bleeds." His voice trembled, not from fear, but from resolve. Lenora swallowed hard. Memories flickered fragments of warmth, her own name whispered in kindness, but they dissolved into the desert wind. She moved again, hand tightening on the rough wood of the doorframe, until splinters bit her palm. Inside, the kerosene lamp sputtered, wax melting slow as hope in her chest. She forced herself to focus. Crow had saved her. He had given her water, shelter, and a sliver of solace. Now he defended her with the same quiet ferocity, but Pike's boot scraped the porch, shifting stance. He raised his rifle. Lenora's pulse thundered in her ears. In the next breath, Lenora heard the crack of the rifle butt as Pike lunged forward. Crow's Winchester barked once, twice, and the bullet slammed into the railing. Splinters exploded. Gunfire erupted. Lenora staggered back, heart in her throat. The cabin trembled. Fear boiled hotter than the desert sun. She pressed her back to the wall, breathing shallow, mind racing. Why had they come for Crow? What buried sin drew them across endless miles? She tried to recall the fragment of a house laughter, her own face, but only the echo of her own confusion answered. The scent of gunpowder and dust filled her nostrils. The color of lamplight bled into her vision. Instinct flared. She could not be a burden. Crow risked everything for her. She would repay him. Lenora lunged for the fallen shotgun beneath the bar, a crude weapon, heavy and unforgiving. She gripped the stock, trembling, but her resolve hardened. The world narrowed to the barrel and the two men outside. Crow's shout cut through the chaos. "Lenora, no!" She hesitated, finger grazing the trigger. Memories rose, a father's soft voice, a lullaby she couldn't fully recall. But the lullaby faltered into terror at gunpoint. She swallowed the rising panic. Lenora hefted the shotgun, the weight a promise of defiance. She stepped onto the threshold. "Don't you dare!" Crow's voice cracked like thunder across the planks. She paused, gaze pinning Pike's scarred jaw. He had once been a boy she'd known, kind eyes turned cruel by time and betrayal. She had Flash, a child's laugh echoing under a willow tree, his bright grin. But that was someone else's memory, stolen from her. Now he leveled his rifle at Crow. Mittani advanced, gun arm steady. Crow's stance faltered for the first time. Lenora felt tears burn behind her eyes. "Breathe," she told herself. "He's with me. He saved me." Pike squeezed the trigger. Crow ducked, rifle rising in a practiced motion. Sparks lanced the night as metal met metal. Lenora fired. The shot tore through the darkness, echoing like a cannon blast. Mittani stumbled, the blast knocking the rifle from his hand. Lenora's heart jerked as the man collapsed into the dirt, blood pooling beneath him. Pike spun, eyes wild, mouth twisted in fury. He lunged towards her, underestimating her panic and determination. Lenora squeezed again, instincts guiding the barrel. This time, the blast echoed close, forcing Pike to stagger. Crow recovered, rushing forward. He wrenched the shotgun from her grip, his expression fierce. "Lenora," he began, voice urgent, but she stamped her boot on the porch. Facing him, "I remember," she whispered, words ripping free. He froze, confusion etching his brow. "You," she gasped, voice cracking. His laugh. It was like yours. She looked at Pike, horror dawning. You're my brother." Pike faltered, jaw dropping. Crow's rifle clattered to the ground as he processed her words. Mittani moaned from the dirt, clutching his wound. Silence crashed over the porch, heavier than gunfire. Lenora's mind spun. How could she remember him, but not herself? The shard of memory glowed. The willow tree, her father's lullaby, and then that night, the barn burning, the scream. Pike staggered forward, tears in his eyes. "Lena!" His voice cracked with shame and longing. Lenora swallowed, tears spilling down her cheeks. Why did you come?" He sank to his knees, rifle abandoned. "To bring you home," he choked. "They said you were dead." Crow moved between them, rifle still in hand. His eyes softened as he looked at Lenora. "She's safe here," he said quietly. Pike's gaze flicked to Crow, then back to Lenora. "She doesn't remember." Lenora nodded, looking from Crow to Pike. She felt the weight of the night shift beneath her. Bones of forgotten truth clicked into place. The wind sighed through the porch chimes, an old melody of home and loss. Outside, dawn's first glow crept. Across the horizon, Lenora Vale stood between two men who had loved her long, before she'd stumbled into Aspen Creek. Her hands shook, still gripping the shotgun's wood. She looked at Crow's savior, stranger, protector, and saw relief in his eyes. She looked at Pike brother, ghost, burden, and saw the face she might have known. Then she whispered, voice trembling yet clear, "I'll go with you." Crow's rifle lowered, eyes fierce yet understanding. Pike closed his eyes, hope and pain mingling. The first bird call of morning drifted on the wind, and Lenora Vale realized that some ghosts demanded to be faced, and some memories refused to be buried. To be continued. To be continued. Part 3 coming next. The sun hung low on the horizon the next morning, spilling gold and copper across the land like molten memory. The dust had not yet settled around Jebediah Crow's cabin, and tension clung to the air like smoke from a lingering fire. Inside, the woman with no name Lenora sat near the hearth, face pale, fingers twisting the hem of her shawl. Outside, the two men, Pike and Mittani, remained where they had fallen, one bleeding, one kneeling, both shattered by revelations that had come like thunder in the night. Crow stood between them and Lenora, as he had the entire night. His rifle, still warm from use, rested against the doorframe. He hadn't slept. He hadn't even sat. His heart, hardened by years of loss and betrayal, felt oddly hollow this morning. He watched the horizon for signs of movement, dust trails, riders, anything to suggest that Pike hadn't come alone. Because men like him never did. Pike stirred first, one knee creaking as he rose to his feet. The scar across his cheek glistened with sweat, and his eyes, so like Lenora's, were rimmed red. Not from pain, but from some older grief now unearthed. She remembers, Pike said hoarsely. She remembers me. Crow didn't answer. Mitanni groaned from the dirt, his shoulders soaked in blood. He'd been bandaged hastily by Lenora herself, but the wound would keep him from riding. Crow had considered what that meant. You couldn't leave a wounded man behind in a place like this, not if you were human. But if Pike had come for vengeance once, what stopped him from trying again? Inside the cabin, Lenora stood. Her steps were more sure than they had been the day before. She looked at Pike, then at Crow. "I have questions," she said simply. Crow nodded. "And you'll get answers. But first, we bury last night." Lenora tilted her head. "You mean?" He gestured toward the patch of churned dirt and blood at the edge of the porch. "No one's dying today. But that doesn't mean the past didn't bleed." She followed him outside. Together, they helped Pike move Mitanni beneath the shade of a cedar. Crow fetched water. Lenora fetched bandages. They moved like a team, like people who had shared lives before memory gave them permission to believe it. And then Pike began to talk. "Your name is Lenora Vale," he said softly as she knelt beside Mitanni. "You were born in Telmore, just north of the Red Valley. You had a laugh like a stream over stone. Our mother said you were the clever one. Father called you Fireburn." Lenora's hands froze over the bandage. "We lost them," Pike continued. "All of them. Raiders came from the eastern ridge. Took everything but our breath. You were 16. I hid you under the floorboards. I didn't get back in time." She stared at him. "Then what? You were gone. Gone like smoke. They said you'd been taken. I hunted for years, Lenora. For years. Then the trail went cold." Her voice was thin. "I don't remember any of it." Pike's face crumpled. "Then let me remember for you." Crow shifted uncomfortably. Emotions. This raw didn't belong in the open air. But something in Lenora's face softened. She reached for her brother's hand. "I believe you," she whispered. That night, they stayed under one roof. Pike helped tend the fire. Crow offered him whiskey. Mitanni, half drunk on pain and laudanum, muttered nonsense about debts, about justice, about the men who would come looking. And that was when Crow knew it wasn't over. Not yet. He rose early, before the dawn. Horses needed feeding. The cattle hadn't been tended in days. But his mind wasn't on chores. It was on strategy. On survival. Lenora joined him, face pale in the half-light. "You think more are coming?" Crow nodded. "Mitanni's not the type to act alone. They're scouts. Muscle, maybe bounty hunters. Maybe something worse. Then we run?" She asked. Crow looked her in the eyes. "You can. You should." She didn't blink. "And leave you?" "I've lived with ghosts a long time, Lenora. I know how to greet them." She shook her head. "Then let's bury the dead together." To be continued. Part 5 picks up directly from here. Dawn's pale light crept through the gap between the cabin's boards, painting the world in muted grays. The air hung heavy with the scent of sage and distant thunder, not yet a storm, but the promise of one. Jebediah Crow led Lenora and Pike to the small corral where Crow's horses were tethered. Mitanni watched from the porch, wrapped in a rough blanket, mouthing silent prayers to gods long abandoned. Crow's stare was fixed on the horizon. "They'll come," he said softly. "But not yet. We have daylight and the element of surprise." Pike nodded, hands steady on the saddle horn. "We move at first light." Lenora hesitated. Behind her, the cabin door opened, and Mitanni lurched forward. "I'm coming," he rasped. Crow's eyes flicked to him. Mitanni's wound was too fresh. But then Mitanni straightened. Determination etched into every line of his face. "Better we're all together," Mitanni said, voice low. Lenora exchanged a glance with Crow. He inclined his head. "All right." The three mounted, Lenora on the Faya. Wounded Mare Crow had used for short rides. The beast limped but held. Crow walked his mount, matching Lenora's pace. Pike fell in beside her. Mitanni followed Crow. The ragged procession moved toward the oak-thick ravine that marked the path to Aspen Creek. As they rode, Crow recounted what he knew. Scouts moving through the Badlands, rumors of bounty hunters hired on shady contracts, whispers of a larger force driven by fear of Lenora's inheritance wealth from the Vale estates, rumored to lie buried beneath red soil. Lenora's gaze drifted to Pike. "They took everything." He touched her arm. "They did, but they can't take this." He gestured at the pair of them. "You're alive." Lightning flickered in the distance. Lenora's heart pounded. Old fears stirred childhood terrors of fire and loss. Crow halted. At the ravine's edge. "We'll cross here. The bank's steep, but they won't expect us." Mitanni dismounted with a wince. Pike helped him, and soon they led the horses down the slope. Lenora followed Crow's lead. The ground shifted beneath her boots. Loose shale rattled into the creek below. A wrong step would be fatal. Halfway down, the wind snapped overhead, an early gust echoing like a warning. Crow paused, listening. "Horse hooves," he whispered. Pike ducked behind a boulder. "We've been followed." Far above, a lone rider picked his way down the ravine, a figure clad in dark leather, revolver glinting in the half-light. Crow pressed back against the rock face. "Stay low." The rider kicked up pebbles, senses straining, then looked directly at them. His eyes widened. He reached for his pistol. Crow drew first. The shot rang out, echoing against the cliffs. The rider stumbled, horse rearing. Mitanni grunted in pain. "More coming." He spat, blood dark against dust. From the ravine's mouth, a dozen more riders charged, boots and hooves drumming in unison. Dust plumed around them like a harbinger of death. Crow's jaw set. "Brace yourselves." Lenora's hand trembled. On her rifle, fear roared in her ears. She looked at Pike, whose face was a calm mask of steel. Then dash amid the approaching thunder of hooves. Lenora inhaled deeply, memory flickering. Another ravine, another ambush in her childhood, bright sparks of gunfire, her father's last command. Adrenaline surged. She squared her shoulders and raised her rifle. 5 riders burst into the clearing, their guns leveled. Lenora squeezed the trigger. "This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe." Now back to the story. The first man toppled. Face slack with surprise, the second lunged forward. Pike met him with drawn Colt, nails clicking on the hammer. Crow fired twice, picking off the third. Mitanni growled, hissing a curse as he slung a bullet into his revolver. The remaining riders faltered, confusion crackling along the line. Crow stepped onto a fallen log, rifle steady. "Turn back now," he shouted. "This land is not yours." One rider dismounted, surrender in his eyes. He dropped the reins. The rest hesitated, huddled around their wounded. Lenora's vision burned with fury. "Tell them to leave," she called. Crow shot a glance at her pride, and fear mixed in his gaze. Pike and Mitanni advanced, revolvers trained. The riders exchanged glances, then shoved their mounts back. Boots scraped the rock. Hooves thundered. Retreat. Dust settled. Silence roared. Crow climbed down. "You all right?" he asked Lenora. She nodded, adrenaline still crackling through her veins. "They won't come again." But the distant horizon still shimmered with dust and other force gathering. Crow's expression darkened. "No," he said, voice low. "They won't stop until they have her back." Lightning forked overhead, illuminating the ravine in stark silver. Lenora's clipped breaths mingled with thunder's growl. She stared at Crow, then at the road ahead. Then we give them hell. And as the storm broke, rain lashed the canyon walls, drumming a fierce rhythm, a prelude to the battle coming for Aspen Creek. Rain turned the dust of the ravine to clay, thick and red like old blood. Each step up the slope was a battle. Mud clung to their boots, their horses stumbled, and thunder cracked over the mesas like ancient drums warning of war. Crow led the way, rifle across his back, eyes always on the skyline. Every gust of wind bent the mesquite and carried the scent of iron and gun oil. It wasn't just weather rolling in from the north, it was something worse. A reckoning. Behind him, Lenora trudged silently, her shawl soaked, her rifle slung across her chest. The storm had peeled away the last of her hesitation. With every breath, she seemed more herself, whoever that was. Her eyes, once clouded with confusion, now burned with quiet fire. Pike followed close behind her, muttering prayers Crow hadn't heard since the war. Mittani brought up the rear, slower than the rest, but dogged in every step his wounded arm. Cradled close by midday, they crested the ridge and saw Aspen Creek sprawled below like a memory refusing to fade. The town looked smaller now. The streets were emptier than they remembered. Windows shuttered, doors barred. But Crow spotted movement, a pair of riders at the edge of town, watching, waiting. "They've already got eyes on us," Pike said, shielding his eyes. "That's not militia. That's militia for hire." Lenora narrowed her eyes. "Mercenaries?" Crow nodded. "Cutthroats, former soldiers, paid to clean up inconvenient truths." "Like me," Lenora muttered. "Crow's." Voice was steady. "You're not inconvenient. You're what they fear." They rode into Aspen Creek without fanfare. No one greeted them. No one stepped out to offer food or shelter. The town had retreated inward like a wounded animal. But Crow didn't need fanfare. He needed time. They took shelter in the abandoned telegraph station near the tracks. Inside, cobwebs hung like veils and the air stank of mildew and old paper. But it was dry, and it offered a view of every road into town. Crow set down his rifle. "We planned tonight. At dawn, we pushed them back. Outnumbered." "And outgunned," Mittani said with a bitter smile. "Hell of a plan." Pike began unrolling a map, pinning it with shell casings. "Then we don't fight them all at once. We split them. Cut their lines. Disrupt their supply." Crow's eyes flicked to Lenora. "You know what they're after. You lead." Lenora blinked. "Me? You're not a ghost anymore." She stepped forward, brushing her damp hair back. "Then we hit the ridge first. They'll stash ammunition near the old mining office." Crow nodded. "Good, then we start there." That night, they moved like phantoms, silent and precise. Pike and Mittani took the south flank. Crow and Lenora approached the ridge. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with tension. The mining office was barely more than a ruin. But, sure enough, crates of ammunition and rations were stashed inside. Two mercenaries played cards by lamplight, their laughter drifting like ghosts. Crow crouched low. "We take them quick. Quiet." Lenora nodded. "On your mark." They struck like lightning. Crow slammed a boot into the door, rifle leveled. Lenora ducked low, sweeping the room. The first man fell before he could shout. The second tried to raise his pistol, but Lenora was faster. She shot once, then again. The second bullet hit his shoulder. He dropped. Howlin'. Crow kicked the pistol away. "How many?" he asked, voice cold. The man groaned. 12 in town. More coming. Tomorrow." Crow looked at Lenora. "Tomorrow's not soon enough for them." They dragged the man outside and left him tied under the porch. A warning and a message. By the time they returned to the telegraph station, Pike and Mittani had hit the stables. Saddles slashed, powder stolen. 3 more mercenaries fled into the desert. leaving behind weapons and whiskey. "Town's waking up," Pike said, wiping blood from his hands. "They're scared, but they're watching." Crow turned to Lenora. "That's all we need." As the sun rose the next morning, Aspen Creek looked different. Not cleaner, not safer, but aware. Windows cracked open. Guns rested in trembling hands. And the air buzzed with a question. Could one lost woman, one quiet man, and two broken brothers change the fate of a town? Lenora stepped into the street. Crow joined her. Behind them, Pike and Mittani took their places, and beyond them townsfolk began to emerge. Not many, but enough. A horn blared in the distance. Dust rose. A convoy of riders approached, mercenaries armored in leather and greed. Lenora raised her rifle. Crow said nothing. He didn't need to dot the battle, for Aspen Creek had begun, to be continued in Part 7. The sound of hooves was thunder now. Not the scattered gallop of scouts, but the deliberate approach of war. A dust cloud rose behind the incoming riders, more than a dozen by Crow's count. Their silhouettes moved in disciplined columns, rifles slung, their vests layered in dark canvas and armor made from scavenged scrap. It wasn't just a crew of hired guns, it was a militia with a purpose, and Lenora Vale was that purpose. She stood at the front of the telegraph station, rifle tight. Against her shoulder, the memory of her father's voice echoing faintly, "When the land rises against you, be the mountain." Crow paced beside her, boots crunching the gravel, calm but coiled. Pike stood atop the post office roof with a borrowed Sharps rifle. Mittani crouched below him at street level, revolver cradled in his good hand. Townsfolk peeked from windows, rifles and rusted pistols trembling in their hands. Crow turned to Lenora. "Last chance to vanish." Lenora shook her head. "I'm tired of running. Let them come." The lead rider broke from the column, a woman with coal-black braids and an iron star sewn onto her vest. Her horse was lean and scarred, like its rider. She stopped 20 paces away, raising a gloved hand. "Parley." She called. Crow nodded once, stepping forward. Lenora followed. They met the rider between buildings, halfway into the street. "I'm Marshall Reed," she said. "We're here for the girl. Hand her over. No blood." Crow said nothing. Lenora lifted her chin. "I have a name." The marshal's eyes flicked to her. "Lenora Vale, heir to the Red Valley Holdings. You've cost powerful men a great deal of money. And how much are they paying you to finish the job?" Lenora asked, fire in her voice. Reed shrugged. "Enough to forget my conscience." Crow's hand dropped to his revolver. "Then you've chosen the wrong town." Reed smiled, slow and deadly. "We burn it then. You made that choice for them." She turned her horse, raised her arm, and dropped it. Gunfire erupted. Crow yanked Lenora back behind a watering trough as bullets tore through wood and glass. Pike fired from above, the Sharps rifle cracking with precision. One mercenary fell, then another. Mittani's revolver roared. To life, Lenora rolled, firing at the flank. Her bullet found a rider's knee. He screamed and tumbled from his horse. Crow stood, aimed, and dropped 2 more with controlled shots. Reed's militia returned fire, rounds splintering the porch near Crow's head. Smoke choked the street. Townsfolk screamed and then something shifted. Doors burst open. Farmers and ranchers stepped into the fray. Old women with shotguns, shopkeepers with muskets. Even the town's blacksmith, hauling a massive iron hammer, waded into the fight. Crow's heart surged. Aspen Creek was choosing. Reed saw it too. Her scowl deepened. Pike's voice cut through the smoke. "They're flanking." More riders appeared from the alley behind the saloon. Crow turned, saw the trap forming. Lenora ran, not away but toward them. She climbed the stairs to the second story of the boarding house, kicking in a shutter and crawling through the window. Inside, she knelt beneath the sill, heart hammering. When the flankers passed below, she dropped a lantern from the window. It shattered on their supplies. Then she lit a match. Fire leapt up, consuming canvas and powder. Ammunition exploded. Riders screamed. Horses reared. Crow turned toward the blast, shielding his eyes. He saw Lenora above, outlined by flame. "She's mad," Mitanni muttered, grinning through blood. "She's winning," Crow corrected. The militia faltered. Their lines broke. Reed barked orders, but her voice was swallowed by chaos. Riders fled. Down the main road, pursued by gunfire and fury, Pike dropped his final round into the chamber, aimed, and fired. Reed's shoulder snapped backward. She fell from her horse. Crow reached her first. He stood over her, revolver drawn. "No more towns, no more children," Reed coughed blood. "You don't get to decide what survives." Crow looked down at her. "No," he said, "but she does." He stepped aside. Lenora approached, rifle slung, eyes hard. "You hunted me for a name," she said. "But I'm not just Vale, I'm Aspen Creek." Reed closed her eyes. "Then bury me deep." Lenora looked to Crow. He nodded. She walked away. The town began to calm. The dead were counted. The wounded were tended. And as the sun set, a stillness returned. Lenora sat beside the fire, boots muddy, eyes hollow. Crow brought her coffee. She took it silently. "You did good," he said. She didn't answer right away. Then, "It still hurts, all of it." He nodded. "That means you're still here." Behind them, townsfolk gathered. A few sang, a few wept. A few simply sat in. Silence, but no one left. Aspen Creek had bled, but it had not fallen. And Lenora Vale, the girl who had stumbled from the desert with no name, had become something none of them expected, a legend, to be continued in Part 8. The fires that consumed the boarding house were long dead by morning, but the smoke lingered, soft gray ribbons curling through broken windows, clinging to walls and rooftops like ghostly reminders of the night before. Aspen Creek had not been razed, it had stood its ground. Yet the cost of that stand lay in the dozen dead, the wounded patched up with whiskey and old rags, and the silence that now hung over the town like a burial shroud. Jebediah Crow sat on the front steps of the telegraph station, rifle across his lap, a tin mug of coffee in his hand. He hadn't slept. He wouldn't, not until he was sure the ground had stopped shifting beneath their feet. Lenora Vale stood in the street alone, arms crossed. She wore her father's duster, now recovered from a mercenary saddlebag, and her boots were stained with ash. Her face was pale but firm, her lips drawn tight. The townsfolk looked at her differently now. No longer a lost girl with a blank past, but a name spoken in the same breath as the town's own survival. Pike limped from the apothecary, with a length of gauze strapped around his ribs. Mitanni followed, still cradling his healing arm. "We counted," Pike said, tossing a folded ledger onto the porch beside Crow. 12 dead. 4 mercs still breathing, all locked up in the stable. "Reed?" Crow asked without turning. "She won't be moving for a while," Mitanni said. "But she's alive." "Let her stay that way," Lenora called from the street, eyes fixed. "On the horizon, we don't need martyrs, we need answers." Crow finally looked up. "What kind of answers?" She turned to face them all. "Why me? Why this town? And who's still out there pulling the strings?" Mitanni snorted. "Always someone higher up the chain." "Then we climb," Lenora said. "We find who sent her." Pike frowned. "You sure? Could be dozens more like her. Could be worse." She nodded. Unsure. Crow rose slowly. "Then we start with what we know." They gathered in the church, one of the few buildings untouched by fire or gunpowder. The pews were dusty, but the altar still held a vase of dried wildflowers, long wilted but oddly defiant. Lenora unrolled a map on the altar. "Red Valley Holdings," she began. "My family's estate before the raids. If there's any paper trail, any legal claim to what's left, it's there." Mitanni leaned in. That's a 3-day ride, and most of it through Badland country. Pike pointed to the pass north of Cattleman's Hollow. We take this route, less patrol. And I know someone near the Twin Teeth Ridges, an old friend. Owes me a favor. Crow folded his arms. We'll need supplies. Ammo, fresh horses. Lenora looked up. Then we asked the town. And they did. That afternoon, they went door to door not as beggars, but as defenders. And the town responded. Mrs. Kettler gave them dried meat and beans. Young Caleb offered up his father's spare rifle. The blacksmith reshoed the horses in silence, handing over a set of custom nails without a word. By sunset, they were packed and mounted. Lenora rode point. Crow followed close behind. Pike and Mittani brought up the rear. They passed the burned husk of the boarding house, the battered saloon, the scorched barn. The townsfolk watched them ride out like they were watching the pages of a legend being written in real time. Once beyond the mesas, the land changed. The earth grew redder, the sky wider. Dust devils danced across dry washes. Coyotes watched. From Ridgeline the first night, they camped near a dry creek bed, the fire small and quiet. Lenora took first watch. She sat with her back against a boulder, rifle resting beside her. Crow joined her before his shift. You all right? He asked. She nodded, then after a beat, added, No, but I will be. He said nothing more. Just sat beside her until the stars thickened and her breathing slowed. The next day, they encountered the first sign of trouble. 3 riders, bandits, not mercenaries, appeared from behind a rock face, weapons drawn. But they didn't fire. One of them, a bearded man with a tattooed neck, squinted at Lenora. You the ghost girl? Lenora narrowed her eyes. Depends who's asking. The man grinned. Name's Orson. Word spread about Aspen Creek. You made some folks nervous. Crow's hand hovered near his holster. Orson held up a palm. Easy, old man. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to offer something. Pike raised a brow. Like what? A map, Orson said. To what your family's enemies are protecting. Not gold, not silver, something worse. Lenora stepped forward. Why help us? Orson shrugged. Because I hate the people who want you dead more than. I hate the risk. He tossed a scroll tied with leather into the dust. Crow picked it up. The parchment was old, marked with unfamiliar symbols. What is it? Lenora asked. Orson smirked. That girl is your inheritance. And with that, he turned his horse and vanished into the canyon shadows. To be continued in Part 9. The parchment smelled like dust and pine pitch, old, brittle, but somehow preserved through time like a bone waiting to be found. Crow held it carefully in his weathered hands, eyes scanning the cryptic scrawl and faded ink. The map wasn't one of trails and towns. It was a diagram, layered and precise, marking not land but structure, an underground complex perhaps. Beneath it, in tiny looping script, were the words, Custodia Rubrum. What survives must remain hidden. What the hell does that mean? Mittani asked, his voice sharp in the early dawn. Pike leaned over Crow's shoulder. Latin, the red. Guard. What survives must remain hidden. Lenora stepped closer, her breath hitching as she stared at the markings. Her fingertips brushed a faded symbol at the top corner, a crest of twin wolves flanking a tree with a star above. I've seen that before, she whispered. On a book, on my father's desk. Crow folded the map carefully. Then Orson's right. This is your inheritance, and your curse. The next leg of their journey bent them westward, skirting dry gorges and brittle ridge paths that could crumble under a horse's misstep. The sun burned hotter here, a punishing blaze that bleached the rocks and skin alike. By the time they reached the old watchtower half buried in sand and ruin, Lenora could barely speak through her cracked lips. They found shelter in the shadow of the tower. It was ancient, circular, stone-bound, but not of local design. Lenora ran her hand along the carvings. This was built by someone else, not ranchers, not prospectors, maybe not even settlers, Pike muttered. Inside, the air was cooler. Beneath their boots, a mosaic had once stretched across the floor, now shattered by time and quake. But in the center, mostly intact, was the symbol again: twin wolves, the tree, and the star. This was a vault, Crow said. Or an entrance. They searched the walls until Mittani found it, a trigger stone hidden behind a collapsed beam. When he pressed it, the floor groaned, then shuddered. A grinding of stone on stone echoed up from the earth. In the center of the mosaic, a circle of flagstones dropped 6 inches and slowly spiraled down, a stairway. They lit lanterns. One by one, they descended, leaving sunlight behind. What they found underground defied explanation. The air was cool and dry. The stairway gave way to a long corridor, lined with iron sconces and dusty murals. Faded paint told of sorry figures, in armor bearing the same crest, standing over an open book as flames consumed a village. Guardians, Lenora said. Of knowledge, of something dangerous. Crow took point. Pike and Mittani flanked him, revolvers drawn. Lenora followed, lantern raised. They passed empty alcoves, ancient weapon racks, and a table covered in scrolls too fragile to touch. At the end of the hall, they found a door of black iron. Embedded in the center was a place for a palm. Lenora hesitated, then placed her hand against the plate. Nothing happened. She frowned. I thought. Pike stepped beside her. Try the ring. She slipped her father's ring from her necklace and pressed it into the panel. With a hiss, the door unsealed. A rush of stale air rolled out. Crow raised his lantern. Inside was a chamber, vaulted ceiling, walls of polished stone, and in the center, a pedestal. Upon it rested a journal. Its leather was deep red, and it bore the crest once more. Lenora stepped forward. She reached for the book. Then a voice echoed from behind. Careful. Some doors, once opened, can't be shut. They spun. Orson stood in the threshold, flanked by 2 figures they didn't recognize, tall, silent, cloaked in desert colors. Crow didn't lower his gun. You followed us. I led you, Orson said. You needed to see it. But now you need to choose. Lenora lifted the journal. It was surprisingly light. What is it? She asked. Proof, Orson replied, of a pact made centuries ago. Your ancestors were not just landowners. They were wardens, protectors of something buried deep under Red Valley. Something ... dangerous. Pike's voice was low. What kind of dangerous? Orson looked at him. The kind that turns men into gods and towns into ash. The journal's pages were filled with diagrams, warnings, records of ancient rituals. Crow skimmed them, his expression growing darker with each turn. This was a containment site, he murmured. Not a treasury, not a library, a prison. Lenora's voice cracked. And now it's unguarded. Orson nodded. That's why they want you dead, not for inheritance, but to erase the last keeper. Silence fell. Finally, Lenora closed the journal. Then we go back. We tell them. We warn them. Crow touched her arm. No, we prepare. Because once they know you have this, he gestured to the book, they'll come harder. They won't just send mercenaries. Pike exhaled. What's worse than mercenaries? Orson smiled sadly. Believers. Above, the first winds of night began to whistle down through the ruins, and far to the east, in a gilded office tower overlooking the capital, a telegram arrived. 6 words only. The Veil Girl found the vault, to be continued in Part 10. The sun hadn't yet risen when Lenora folded the journal shut. The vault around her still hummed with a faint vibration, like the walls themselves remembered what had once been imprisoned there. Her hand trembled as she tucked the red leather book into her pack, wrapping it in a spare shirt as though cloth could contain the weight of it. Crow adjusted the rifle on his back. We ride before dawn. If we wait, They'll have sent scouts, or worse. Matani asked. Pike knelt. At the threshold of the vault, fingers brushing the etched stone. He means believers. They all looked to Orson. He nodded. They call themselves the Sanctum. Cult? Lenora asked. Worse, Orson said. True believers. Old bloodlines. Families tied to the original Guardians. They believe the vault was never meant to be sealed. That power, real power, should be in the hands of the chosen. Crow spat into the dust. Always the same. Power and its excuses. They emerged from the stairway by lantern light, the cool air of the desert morning slapping their cheeks. The horses had rested, watered themselves at the trickle of runoff nearby. Pike had already saddled them by the time the others finished. Packing, Lenora hesitated, looking back at the tower ruins. A sliver of moon still hung over the ridge. Do we seal it? She asked. Crow shook his head. Too late. Once a secret breathes air, it doesn't forget. They rode in silence for hours. By mid-morning, the red cliffs gave way to open plains. And on the edge of that openness stood a man, alone. Still, he wore no armor. No hat, just a long gray coat and a pendant of coiled silver hanging around his neck. His hands were empty, but his eyes were sharp. Crow slowed his horse. That's no merc. Orson's voice was tight. Sanctum. Lenora urged her horse forward. Let me talk to him. Crow grabbed her reins. You're not their prophet. You're their prize. But she shook him off. As she approached, the man bowed. Lenora Vale, he said. Who are you? She asked. My name is Silas Ash. I speak for the Sanctum. What do you want? He smiled. To help you remember. I remember enough. She snapped. Not yet, he said. But you will. We all will. Behind her, the others fanned out. Pike raised his rifle. Matani checked his revolver. Silas didn't flinch. The journal belongs to us. No, Lenora said. It belongs to no one. Then you've already failed, he said. Because we've opened another vault. The words hit her like a slap. Crow stepped forward. Where? Silas smiled. Ask your mother. Lenora's blood ran cold. My mother's dead. Silas cocked his head. Is she? Then he turned and walked away. No horse. No caravan. Just vanished into the dunes. Pike. Cursed. What the hell was that? Orson's face had gone pale. He was telling the truth. The Sanctum's been digging for decades. The Vale Vault was only the beginning. They set up camp that night near the dry riverbed known as the Serpent's Spine. Lenora didn't sleep. She stared into the fire. The journal on her lap. Crow sat beside her. You think he was lying? She asked. No. About my mother? Crow exhaled slowly. Could be a lie wrapped around a sliver of truth. Or maybe she made a deal to protect you. Maybe she's been alive in ways you didn't know. I don't understand any of this. Lenora said. Crow looked at her. You don't have to understand it all. You just have to decide what to do next. She stared at the flames until they blurred. By morning, they had a plan. Pike's contact near Twin Teeth Ridge, an old miner named Bramley, agreed to give them shelter and a route through the lowlands off map and untraveled. But the Sanctum was faster. When they reached Bramley's cabin, it was burning. Crow charged in with a soaked cloth across his face, dragging the old man out through the flames. Bramley was barely breathing, his skin blistered. He clutched Crow's collar. They knew your names, burned my maps, said the gate's already open. He died before sunrise. Lenora buried him herself. They turned south, pushing toward the last known Sanctum outpost, an abandoned mission in the Stone Hills, once used by desert monks, now rumored to be sanctified ground for the cult. The mission was silent, empty. But beneath the altar, they found another vault, and it was open. Inside, there was no journal, only a stone basin filled with a glowing amber fluid. And a name scratched into the wall, Marla Vale. Lenora fell to her knees. Crow knelt beside her. "Is that?" "My mother," she whispered. "She opened this." Mitanni stepped back. "Then she's with them," Orson disagreed. "Or working against them. Only a veil could open this." Pike ran his hand through his hair. "So now what?" Crow looked to Lenora. "Now we stop pretending this is about treasure," Lenora stood. Her voice was hoarse, but certain. "Then we end the sanctum. We end the legacy. We seal every vault and destroy whatever's inside." Crow nodded. "No more keepers, no more secrets." Outside, the wind picked up. Thunder rumbled on the far horizon dot and in the capital. Another message was sent. "Initiate Phase 2. She's reading the book. To be continued in Part 11. The next 3 days became a blur of grit, shadow, and hard choices. They left the mission behind at sunrise, the amber basin still glowing in the hollow beneath the altar. Lenora had refused to touch it. Crow wouldn't let her, not with the journal growing heavier in her satchel with each passing hour. Whatever power slept in that basin, it had already spoken to someone in her bloodline, and that someone, her mother, was still out there. They crossed dry ravines littered with sun-bleached cattle bones. They passed through ghost towns, their storefronts collapsed and overtaken by desert ivy. At night, the stars glared down with the cold judgment of 1,000 ancestors. And at every stop, they found signs. The sanctum's path scorched through the land like a slow-moving fire. Burned outposts. Vanished ranches. Etchings in stone bearing the coiled silver sigil of Silas Ash. They weren't chasing rumors anymore. They were following a warpath. On the morning of the 4th day, Pike spotted smoke curling from behind a mesa. They circled wide and came upon a camp. 3 sanctum members knelt in the center of a salt flat, painting symbols into the dust. Their horses were tethered nearby, calm and oblivious. Crow signaled for silence. They crept closer. As Lenora approached, one of the robed figures looked up. He was young, maybe 16, and not surprised. "I've been waiting," he said. "Who are you?" Lenora asked, rifle raised. "Doesn't matter," the boy said. "They'll send more. You're too late anyway." Crow knelt beside him. "Late for what?" The boy pointed to the horizon. "Phase 2. Mitanni growled. "You sanctum bastards keep talking in riddles." "Say it plain," the boy smiled. "It's not about unlocking power anymore. It's about releasing it." Pike paled. "What does that mean?" The boy looked at Lenora. "You read the book. You know what's under Red Valley." She didn't answer. He leaned forward. "You're the key. You always were." Crow stood and nodded once. Pike dragged the boy to his feet. They tied him, gagged him, and left him bound beside the painted symbols. As they mounted their horses again, Lenora whispered, "He's not lying." Crow didn't respond. They reached Red Valley on the 6th day. The sun was low, a red smear across the canyon. The estate loomed in the center, a walled compound of sandstone and imported iron. It had once been beautiful. Now it looked like a mausoleum. The front gate hung open. No guards. They approached on foot, rifles drawn. Inside, the manor was cold. Dust coated the marble floors. Portraits lined the walls, each depicting a Vale ancestor. Some Lenora recognized from stories. Some wore faces she'd seen only in dreams. Crow moved silently. Pike and Mitanni covered the rear. At the far end of the hall, beneath a skylight cracked by time, stood a woman in a black coat. Lenora stopped. "Marla," Crow whispered. Her mother turned slowly. Her eyes were clear. Her hands were empty. "Hello." "Nora," Lenora trembled. "I thought you were dead." "I was," Marla said, "but some debts aren't paid with breath." Crow stepped forward. "You opened the second vault." "I had to," Marla said. "They were coming. They were always coming. You think I wanted to leave my daughter in the dust?" "Then why?" Lenora asked, voice breaking. "Because I couldn't let you be the one," Marla said. "Not then." Pike whispered to Mitanni, This is getting biblical. Marla looked directly at Crow. Do you still have the journal? Crow's jaw tightened. No, she nodded. Good, then there's still time. Time for what? Lenora asked. Marla crossed to a locked door, key already in her hand. To show you what they want. The door opened. Behind it was a staircase that spiraled down, torchlit and ancient. Older than the manor. Older than the Vale name. They descended in silence. At the bottom, a cavern yawned open. Crystalline walls reflected torchlight into 100 colors. And at the center, a sarcophagus. It pulsed. Not with light. With sound, a heartbeat. Lenora stumbled back. What is that? Marla knelt, the first prisoner. Before the Red Guard. Before the Veils. A being not of earth, but born of fire and thought. It sleeps, but only barely. Pike looked ill. That's what the Sanctum wants, Marla nodded. They think it can be bound. Controlled. Mittani muttered. They're mad. No, Crow said. They're desperate. Lenora clutched the edge of the stone. So what do we do? Marla looked at her daughter. We finish what I started. We destroy the vault. Bury this creature forever. But if we do that, Marla smiled faintly. We'll die, likely, but we'll end it. Silence. Then Crow. Step forward, then show us where to place the charges. Above in the hills, riders approached. The Sanctum had arrived, to be continued in Part 12. The cavern walls trembled faintly with the pressure of each beat, a soundless thud that seemed to bypass the ears and press directly into the chest. Lenora pressed her hand to the side of the sarcophagus and felt it, the rhythmic pulse of something. Ancient, alive, barely. Crow laid out the satchels of dynamite one by one, unrolling fuse wire and calculating distance with the calm of a man who'd rigged mines for a living. Marla. Vale moved with equal certainty. She marked 6 support points along the crystalline pillars, each one a nerve in the cave's living spine. When they go, the whole structure folds in on itself. And it has to be all of them simultaneously. Pike and Mittani stood near the entrance of the spiral staircase, weapons drawn. I count 8, Mittani said, peering into the dark. Make that 11, Pike added. Another patrol just crested the bluff. Then we've got maybe 15 minutes, Crow muttered. Lenora checked her rifle and strapped a second pistol to her thigh. Marla handed her a small box, wooden, worn, fitted with a brass switch. What's this? Lenora asked. Dead man's trigger, her mother said. You hit that switch, all the charges go at once. Lenora looked at her. You want me to carry it? Marla nodded. It's yours to end. The first Sanctum scouts appeared like ghosts' gray robes flickering along the cavern mouth, their movements strangely silent. Pike fired first. The shot cracked the tension, echoed through stone, and dropped one of the robed figures. Then the onslaught began. Bullets ripped down the corridor. Crow ducked behind a crystal outcropping, returning fire in sharp bursts. Mittani rolled smoke grenades into the opening. Thunder filled the space. Marla planted the 4th charge. Blood streaked her sleeve from a grazing shot, but she kept working. Lenora ran point to point, covering her mother with precise shots. Each pull of the trigger was steadier than the last. She no longer flinched at the recoil. By the 5th charge, they were surrounded on 3 sides. Crow radioed Pike, voice grim. Bye. US 30 more seconds. That's all I need. Pike responded with the click of his bolt. A new figure emerged, Silas Ash. He walked through the chaos untouched, as if the battle parted for him. The pendant around his neck glowed faintly. You shouldn't have opened the book, he said to Lenora. I didn't, she said. I read it. His lips curled. Then you understand what you're about to bury. What you'll deny the world. She raised her rifle. Not deny. Protect. He nodded solemnly. Then I'll take the trigger. He lunged. Marla tackled him mid-step, the two of them crashing against the sarcophagus. The stone groaned beneath them. Silas recovered fast too fast. He drew a curved blade and slashed at Marla's ribs. Lenora screamed. Crow fired, the bullet tearing through Silas's shoulder, but he didn't fall. He only snarled and struck Marla again. Blood sprayed the side of the sarcophagus. Lenora ran. To them, fired point-blank into Silas's back. This time he fell. Marla clutched Lenora's sleeve. Sixth charge, now. Lenora nodded and sprinted. Crow and Mittani held the Sanctum forces at bay, each retreating step measured, controlled. Pike rejoined them with his knife bloodied, breathing hard. Lenora reached the final charge and primed. "It everyone out," Crow bellowed. They fell back. The spiral staircase was now a bottleneck of falling dust, and shouted. "Orders!" Lenora paused at the mouth of the tunnel. Marla lay slumped against the sarcophagus. "You have to go." Lenora cried. Her mother shook her head. "If they breach the vault again, someone has to make sure it stays buried." Lenora hesitated. Marla smiled. "I'm proud of you, Nora. All of them would be. Your father. Your grandfather. All the keepers." Tears streamed down Lenora's face. "I don't want to lose you again." "You're not. I'm where I belong." Marla pressed something into her palm, a second trigger. "If you get out and they come again, press this, no matter who's inside." Lenora nodded, sobbing. She ran. Crow grabbed her at the top of the stairs. "Vaults primed?" "Yes." "Then do it." She looked back once. Just once. Then she flipped the switch. The explosion was like the roar of 1,000 hurricanes. The floor beneath their feet heaved. The entire manor above began to collapse. Dust and fire chased them through the halls as they sprinted for the gate. They burst into daylight seconds before the estate folded in on itself like a sinking ship. Silence followed, real silence. Then Lenora screamed one long, unbroken sound of grief, rage, and release. Crow held her. Said nothing. The Sanctum survivors were already fleeing. Pike, Mittani, and a handful of townsfolk from Aspen Creek, who had ridden hard to follow the smoke, rounded them up without mercy. The war, for now, was over. Lenora stood at the ruins the next morning, the journal ashes in her hands. She was the last of the old, she said. "I'm the first of the new." Crow nodded. Mittani offered her a canteen. Pike added quietly, "So what now?" Lenora looked at the horizon. "We rebuild. We remember. But no more vaults, no more secrets. We tell the truth. Let it echo." She mounted her horse. And with the wind at her back, Lenora Vale rode not into legend, but into the world she would help create. To be continued in Part 13, the final chapter. The wreckage of the Vale estate smoldered for 3 days. Ash drifted across the hills like snow, silent and unacknowledged. Ravens nested in the broken ironwork that once crowned the manor's roof, now twisted like blackened ribs against the sky. The wind carried the scent of scorched stone, split cedar, and old blood. Nothing grew. Nothing sang, and yet for the first time in generations, Aspen Creek slept without sentries on its roofs. Lenora Vale sat in the old telegraph station, her boots propped against the windowsill. The journal was gone, destroyed with the vault, but she no longer needed it. What she had seen, what she had lived, was branded into her bones. The town had changed. People met her eyes now. They nodded when she passed. Some still feared her, but not in the way they feared outlaws or curses. It was reverence, recognition. She was no longer the stranger who wandered out of the desert with no name. She was the one who stopped the Sanctum, and the Sanctum had scattered. What few members survived had vanished into the canyons, their temples burned, their relics crushed under the weight of truth. The sheriff, long a puppet of bribes and fear, had stepped down. Crow refused to replace him, and so the people formed the council led by Ada Murphy, the blacksmith's widow who had once boarded up her windows when Lenora walked past. Now she brought fresh bread to every meeting. Crow worked the ranch again, though with fewer cattle and more apprentices. He taught slowly, without much praise. but with a patience carved from loss and weather. Pike had taken to traveling between towns liaison, scout, and occasional enforcer. The badge he wore wasn't official, but no one questioned it. Mittani remained close, building a forge on the edge of town and hammering steel by day, training orphans by night. He'd adopted 3 strays without realizing it, kids, who followed him with wide eyes and called him sir, even when he swore at the sky dot. As for Lenora, she rode. She mapped every trail, every canyon, every fault line where a vault might hide. She dug up ruins, read every book the Aspen Creek Library could offer, and when that was exhausted, she rode north to the university in Caro Hill. There, in the archives, she found something she hadn't expected. Other names, other bloodlines, other families like the Vales. Not all of them had vanished. Not all of them had surrendered to the sanctum. Some had gone underground. Some had watched in silence, waiting for proof that the war was real. When Lenora sent out her first letters, carefully worded, sealed with wax carved in the shape of the twin wolves and the tree, only one answered. But within a month, there were 4 by winter. There were 17 and each had stories, maps, secrets, keys. They called themselves many things: custodians, watchers, scions, but under Lenora's lead, they chose a new name, the Reverend Circle. Not an army. A witness. Their purpose wasn't to keep power. It was to bury it, expose it, warn of it. The world, they knew, was changing. Industry roared across the plains. Governments expanded. Wars brewed overseas. But beneath it, all beneath concrete, beneath memory vaults, remained too many, and too few remembered the cost of opening even one. Spring returned to Aspen Creek in blooms of stubborn color, purple wildflowers dotting the gullies, bright green moss clinging to canyon stones. The town rebuilt the schoolhouse, added a second well, and opened a post office. On the first day of the thaw, a stranger rode into town. She was young, pale, hair braided in military knots. She asked for Lenora Vale by name. Crow met her first. "She's not what you think," he told the girl. "I hope not," the girl replied. Lenora met her outside the telegraph station. The girl introduced herself as Ellis Rourke, her grandmother. It turned out, had once been listed in the Red Vault registry. Another bloodline. Another ember in the dark. "I want to help," Ellis said. Lenora smiled. "Then get a shovel." The following year, the Reverend Circle uncovered 4 more vaults. Were empty. One was buried under a mining town that had already collapsed into sinkholes, killing hundreds. That vault they sealed forever. The 4th was different. It was filled with bones. Inside were notes, journals, sketches, an entire library documenting not just the imprisoned entity, but the lives of those who studied it, lived beside it, died for it. The Circle turned the site into an archive, quiet, guarded, not hidden. That was Lenora's rule. Nothing hidden. She rode into the hills alone one summer morning. Returned 4 days later with a silver pendant around her neck. Crow didn't ask how she found it. Pike didn't ask why she wore it. Mittani just smirked. "You planning to run a church now?" Lenora laughed. "Only if we sing hymns with rifles." But the pendant was more than a relic. It had been Silas' ashes, found at the edge of the crater that used to be the Vale Vault. She wore it not to remember him, but to remind herself that faith, unmoored from truth, could be the most dangerous vault of all. 10 years later, they wrote her name into textbooks, not as a savior, not as a saint, but as the woman who stopped the sanctum, destroyed the Red Vault, and founded the circle that would safeguard the old world against the new. Some scholars questioned her choices. Some called her a myth. But when the sky burned red over the Norin Flats, and a fault line split wide enough to reveal obsidian steps leading down, it was her people who arrived first, and it was her words they carried. Power is not buried to protect the world from it. Power is buried to protect the world from us. Lenora Vale died at 80-7. No children. No husband. No grave. Just a single marker at the top of a red hill. Facing the ruins of the estate. It reads, "Let what was lost remain lost. Let what was hidden remain known. And let what sleeps never wake." The wind still stirs through Aspen Creek. Sometimes, at dusk, they say you can see her silhouette on horseback, just at the edge of the desert. Watching, protecting, and reminding the world. Legends aren't born. They're buried, and some ride back to make sure they stay that way. The end. Lenora Vale's legacy had settled into the foundations of Aspen Creek like bedrock, but the reverent circle lived on, and with it, the echoes of vaults waiting in silent anticipation. The circle had grown to include scholars, ranchers, and wanderers, each sworn to the vow to guard the secrets that would destroy us. Part 14. The Wickham Vault. One winter, Ellis Rourke, newly inducted and eager, discovered mention of a vault in the archives of Carroll Hill University. The reference was brief: Wickham family papers, mention of subterranean library near Old Ashford Mine. Ellis rode out alone, determined to prove herself. The journey was treacherous: blizzards, crevasses, and memory-haunted mines. But she persisted. Guided by the silver pendant Lenora once wore. Deep beneath the mine, she found a service tunnel sealed with iron plates. The pendant fit a recessed clasp. With effort, the door groaned open, revealing a spiral staircase descending into crystalline gloom. At the bottom, she found shelves carved from obsidian, filled with scrolls bound in animal hide. The Wickham Vault was a herbarium of forbidden knowledge: recipes for poisons, formulas for mind-altering elixirs, maps to hidden caches of alchemical reagents. A guide for those who would bend nature to will. Ellis realized the danger. Those scrolls could unleash plagues or armies of the mind. She methodically documented each finding, then set explosive charges to collapse the vault behind her. She emerged to the storm, snow falling like powdered ash. She reported to the circle. Wickham Vault destroyed. Knowledge unharvested. Over the next 5 years, the circle unearthed 4 more. Part 15. The Dalton Codex, lost in the swamps of Vermilion Bend, containing proto-engineering diagrams for steam engines capable of powering war machines. Smoldering. Remains marked its end. Part 16. The Marburg plague tanks, hidden in a fortress in the Blackrock Alps. Vials of aerosolized pathogens never deployed, but potent enough to exterminate species. Sealed by unknown triggers. Neutralized by Circle ALCHEMISTS. Part 17. The Isla Meridian Project. An underwater vault off the coast of New Providence Island. Recording experiments on mind-link remnants of aspirations to commune with marine intelligences. Drained and flooded beneath a deliberate storm barrier collapse. Part 18. The Senegal. Sigils etched in the desert sands north of Timbuktu. Inscriptions for summoning solar flares via crystal resonance. Erased by desert winds, orchestrated by circle members. Each vault left scars on the land. Each required careful stewardship. Meanwhile, Aspen Creek grew into a hub for the circle. A small campus bloomed outside town. The Vale Institute, an academy dedicated to the study of hidden threats and ethical stewardship. Scholars came from around the globe, drawn by the Vale promise. To turn away from power, not toward it. Lenora's marker atop the red hill remained. Visitors often left stones and tokens, a tribute to her vision. One autumn evening, Part 19, the eclipse. Ritual. A delegation from the circle had gathered for the centennial of Lenora's passing. Under a total solar eclipse, they performed a ceremonial unveiling of a new archive wing at the Institute. As the moon blotted out the sun, strange energies flickered in the air. Scholars gasped as inscriptions on the walls glowed, a warning left by an unknown hand. Centuries before. The warning read, "Beware the shadowed eye. Not all vaults are meant to stay buried." Panic rippled. Had the sanctum returned? Or was another force at work? Part 20. The Watchers awaken in the desert beyond Aspen Creek. A tremor fractured the earth. Beneath the surface, an underground complex long dormant stirred to life. Mechanisms ground, valves hissed, and a sealed chamber opened. A shadowed eye awakening at the Institute. Alarms blared. The circle scrambled. Scouts returned with news. A cavern had cracked, revealing conduits leading to the ancient vault of the Watchers, architects of all vaults, keepers of the primordials. Lenora's journal, fragmented in memory, hinted at this, a final testament that the circle had never found. Its pages lost, but its spirit alive in the vow. Let what sleeps never wake. As dust devils danced on the horizon, the circle prepared to face their greatest challenge. Not just tomes of dead knowledge, but entities older than memory. The Watchers, whose awakening would reshape the world. The final battle for the hidden world was about to begin. End of Volume 1. Part 15. The Dalton Codex. The rain came in sheets, drumming on tin roofs and flooding the gutters of Aspen Creek. The Vail Institute's slate buildings gleamed under the storm's onslaught, as if baptized anew. Inside, lanterns flickered in. Corridors lined with display cases, samples from vaults long sealed, each a testament to human folly and redemption. Lenora Vail's desk stood guard at the end of the main hall, its surface strewn with maps, journals, and the silver pendant that had once guided her through the Wickham vault. Tonight, she pored over a new set of reports, her fingers ghosting lines of text that described events half a world away. The Dalton Codex. Ellis Rourke entered, dripping and determined. "It's confirmed," she said. "The Dalton Codex is real, and it's in the swamp." Lenora's eyes narrowed. "Vermilion Bend," Ellis nodded. "South of the bend in the bayou. The old logging camp collapsed decades ago. No one's been back since." "Then we'll go," Lenora said. "As soon as the rain eases." Ellis hesitated. "You won't come with us." Lenora shook her head. "My place is here. You've earned your initiation. Pike, Mittani, Orson, they'll accompany you." Ellis opened her mouth, then closed it. "Understood." They departed at dawn the next day. Ellis Rourke, Pike, Mittani, and Orson, an unlikely fellowship bound by purpose. The rain had cleared to lingering mist. The road to Vermilion Bend was slick and muddy. Cypress roots yielded beneath there. Horses' hooves as they rode deeper into the swamp. The air thickened. Cicadas droned in the treetops. Water lily drifted on stagnant pools. The scent of decay grew stronger, rotting wood, unclaimed bodies, secrets entombed in peat. Pike glanced back. "This place gives me the creeps." Mittani's hand tightened on the reins. "Few places out here don't." Orson raised his lantern. "The camp should be just ahead." They found it at a bend where the bayou forked, a scattering of collapsed wooden shacks half submerged in muck. Boards hovered at odd angles. Rusted saws lay half buried. Ellis dismounted. "This used to be the Dalton logging operation. They weren't just after timber, they discovered an underground cache." Orson frowned. "They never came back." Pike drew his Colt. "Then we'll go get it." They waded through water to the largest shack, its floor sagging. Inside, a trapdoor gaped. Mittani dropped a lantern. "This is it." They pried it open and descended. The tunnel walls were slick with algae. Roots dripped from the ceiling. Half-buried machinery rusted tracks. Broken carts lined the narrow gauge line that continued into darkness. Orson held out a map. The Codex was stored in the sub-basement. "We need to follow the tracks." They pushed forward, boots echoing. Rainwater seeped through cracks, dribbling down to form pools at their heels. The tunnel sloped downward. At a corner, the tracks ended at a reinforced door, steel-plated, etched with crude glyphs. Mittani pressed his ear. Nothing on the other side. Ellis carefully examined the glyphs. DALCXII. Pike cracked his knuckles. "Any objections?" Ellis shook her head. "None at all." They pried the door open. It revealed a small room, floor-to-ceiling shelves heaped with crates. Each bore stenciled letters. Dia Lton. Orson lifted one. "Here we go." He pried the lid. Inside lay an iron-bound manuscript, its pages thick, sealed in oilcloth. Ellis's hands trembled. The Dalton Codex. She wiped rain from her eyes and undid the bindings. The first page shimmered with diagrams, blueprints. For high-pressure steam engines capable of producing unprecedented force. On the margins, notes in pencil. Construct for military trials. Prototype complete. Below, a second glyph. A warning. If unleashed, the iron beasts will consume all. Mitanni swallowed. Beasts? Ellis pointed to a later diagram, mechanical. Prototypes, steam-driven war machines on rails, capable of leveling entire cities. Pike exhaled. "We can't let this leave here," Orson nodded. "Then we destroy it." Ellis hesitated. "But maybe we can preserve the knowledge, keep it hidden, but study it." Lenora's voice echoed in her mind. "No more vaults, no more secrets." She closed the book. "No, this is too dangerous." They rigged the room gas lines and oil-soaked rags. Each drew lots. 2 would stay behind to watch. 2 would escape to signal the explosion. Orson and Pike remained. Ellis and Mitanni fled up the tunnel. Pike's cold clicks echoed as he signaled. Orson gave a grim nod and pressed the match. The explosion ripped through the cavern, hurling plumes of water and mud upward, sealing the doorway. They ran. The mosaic of fire and water chasing them through the tunnel until at last they burst into daylight, coughing and exhausted. Behind them. The ground shuddered. It was done. Weeks later, Ellis stood before the circle. She reported, "Dalton Codex destroyed. No survivors in the camp, but no matter. The knowledge of war machines drowned in fire." Crow listened from the back row. Lenora's pendant glinted at his neck. When Ellis finished, the room was silent. Lenora rose. "You did well." She looked at each member. "But remember, every vault we seal, every secret we destroy, is a debt to the world. We guard, we protect, but we do not pretend the past never was." A hush. Then Molly Chun, head archivist, spoke. "So how many more to go?" Lenora's gaze fell on the door. 20 more. And with that, the circle rose a testament to a vow older than any vault. To stand watch, even when the world forgets. To be continued in Part 16. Part 16. The Marburg plague tanks in the steamy air of the Blackrock Alps. Beneath shifting glaciers and jagged peaks lay the ruins of the Marburg Fortress, once a secret research outpost built by alchemists and proto-scientists obsessed with harnessing disease as a weapon. Now it stood half-buried in permafrost, the wind howling through its collapsed archways like a ghostly lament. Lenora Vale's journal, preserved in memory though scorched ash, spoke only in oblique fragments. Marburg, plague, tanks, never to see the sky again. Her notes had guided Pike, Mitanni, and Orson across continents. But this journey would be the most harrowing yet, for the fortress held horrors alive in vats of half-frozen fluid pathogens capable of reshaping humanity. They arrived at dawn, the air crystalline and biting. Pike led 2 scouts to scout the perimeter. Mitanni prepared gear, a portable flamethrower jury rigged from salvaged parts, protective suits, and field decontamination kits. Orson silently knelt by the gate, whispering prayers of warding. Lenora watched them go, heart heavy. She recalled the faces of the sick, the children of Whisper Creek who'd healed after their first vault rescue. Now she had to descend again, not for redemption, but for eradication. They entered through a breach in the outer wall, ice crunching underfoot. Within, the fortress was a labyrinth of corridors lined with sealed cells. Many lay empty, their occupants long perished. But the central chamber, the plague vault, still hosted massive steel cylinders, half submerged in brine, each labeled with alchemical runes. "Anyone feeling second thoughts?" Pike asked, voice muffled inside his hood. Lenora shook her head. We finished this. They split into 2 teams. Mittani and Orson prepped the demolition charges at the vault door. Pike and Lenora advanced to disable the tanks. Inside the chamber, the scent of chemical rot stung their lungs even through respirators. Pipes hissed, pressure gauges rattled. Lenora pried open the access panel of the nearest tank. A droplet of pale green fluid threatened to escape, as if the contents fought to live. She coughed. These vials, one gets loose, it'll spread. Pike nodded. Then we removed the tanks from containment. With careful grips, they hauled the first canister down the corridor. It hissed a warning note, but held. They repeated with each of the dozen tanks until they reached the outer gate. Mittani's charges set on a timed fuse would seal and collapse the vault behind them, burying the tanks forever. As they raced the timer, a thunderclap echoed. Suddenly, a dozen black-clad operatives of the sanctum emerged from hidden passages. Rifles leveled. Drop it! A voice called. Lenora eased the tank onto the ground. You want it back? The sanctum advanced. Pike raised his Colt. You'll have to take it from us. A firefight erupted in the narrow corridor, bullets spitting sparks against ice-chilled metal. Flamethrower jets roaring to life. Echoing shouts swallowed by stone. Lenora kicked the first tank, setting it rolling toward the canyon mouth. She sprinted after it. Behind her, explosions sounded. Mittani's charges had detonated, collapsing the plague vault. The ground shook as the fortress began to give way. They scrambled outside as the tanks tumbled down the slope, shattering against rocks and sending fragments of ice and metal into the sky. Sanctum operatives retreated into the smoke and fire as the fortress half collapsed, sealing its deadly heart. Forever, they regrouped at the cliff's edge, watching the inferno consume the walls. Pike exhaled. So many ways to kill. Lenora stared into the blaze. None worth saving. Mittani clapped her shoulder. That's 2 down, 18 to go. Lenora nodded, the weight of her vow heavier than ever. And as the dawn light glinted off the distant peaks, she whispered to the wind, let no plague find purchase in our world. To be continued in Part 17. Part 17. The Isla Meridian Project. The sea can be a gentle cradle or a vengeful grave. For the Reverend Circle, the waters off New Providence Island straddled both tropical sun and azure waves, masking the Isla Meridian Project, a sunken vault built to house experiments in mind link with marine intelligences. Rumors spoke of devices that could project human consciousness into whale pods, control entire schools of fish, or worse, erase memory with a single pulse. Ellis Rourke, the newest Circle Scout, led this expedition, flanked by veteran aquanauts Mara Gambrel and Theo Arkham. Their vessel, the Vale's Embrace, bobbed gently at the dock as they suited in wetsuits lined with protective circuitry. Lenora Vale stood on the dock, wrapped in a weathered shawl, eyes fixed on the horizon. She carried the second dead man's trigger, always within reach. She did not dive. Her place was on land, bearing witness. We don't know what's down there, Mara said, securing her helmet. Theo checked the sensors. Sonars picked up a structure 600 feet down, just off the reef at coordinates E7. Not natural. Ellis nodded. Time to find out if minds should ever wander that far. They slipped into the warm Caribbean waters, descending through luminescent jellyfish and drifting schools. As they sank, the sun's warmth faded, replaced by the profound stillness of the deep. Then the vault emerged, a circular dome of corroded titanium glass, encrusted with barnacles and coral. Hydraulic pistons hissed as the entrance panel slid open. Mara's voice crackled. Hello? Anyone home? No answer, only water and the hum of submerged machinery. They entered, lights piercing the darkness. Inside, rows of pods lined a central chamber, each connected to a crystalline conduit that pulsed with deep-sea bioluminescence. On the walls, faded diagrams depicted brains fused with cephalopods, dolphins, and whales. Neural cartography of aquatic minds. Ellis approached the nearest pod. The console flickered. Words scrolled. Subject 42. Successful link. Consciousness achieved. She swallowed. They did it. Theo tapped his helmet mic. No life signs in the pod. But sensors. Detect faint brainwaves, ghost signals. Mara knelt by the control panel. There's a release valve here. If we open it, the link will destabilize, erase memories in a broad radius. Ellis looked back at the control room, deeper in the vault. There, the Meridian engine. That's the core. We disable it, seal the conduit. They moved swiftly. At the engine room door, Mara hacked the biometric lock. Inside, the massive crystal thrummed. Electrodes spilled across its facets, dripping salty water. Theo hesitated. This could be unprecedented, but so is letting it stay active. Ellis set charges around stabilizers. We cut power, collapsed the conduit. As she wired the last fuse, the pods behind them hissed. Lights brightened, and a chorus of faint, alien voices echoed through their helmets. Whispers of whales, clicks of dolphins, squelches of octopi. Mara stepped back. They're awake. The engine's hum deepened, each pulse traveling through the water, stirring the reef outside. Ellis's heart pounded. Detonate! She hit the panel. The explosion was muted underground, but the glass dome above cracked. Water poured in as they fled through the corridors. Pods shattered, geysers of fluid and light cascading. The Veil's embrace sounded alarms as debris buried their descent cables. Theo jammed open a side hatch, and the three flooded out into open water. Gasping, they kicked for the surface, broken. Conduit collapsing behind them. The vault's dome imploded, leaving only swirling sediment and silence. Back on deck, Lenora held Ellis, trembling. Mara and Theo collapsed beside her, tears in their eyes. Ellis whispered, "We saw their memories fractured. Hallucinatory. Some real. Some not. It wasn't just power. It was theft." Lenora placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we bury it deeper." As the embrace steamed away, an orca leapt alongside, an impossible guardian in the rising sun. Ellis watched it dive, vanishing. Beneath waves, she closed her eyes. "I think it thanked us." Lenora nodded, turning away. "And we thank it for reminding us why some doors must never open." To be continued in Part 18. Part 18. The Senegal signals into the blistering Saharan sun. The dunes north of Timbuktu ripple like dunes of gold and fire. Sand drifts whisper secrets, shaped by winds older than written history. The reverent circles caravan camels laden with water skins, solar panels, and protective tents cut a narrow line across the rolling sands. Guided by dear guest Sheikh Amadou Ndiaye, keeper of ancient oral traditions. Amadou's gnarled hands traced invisible lines in the sand as they rode. "The sigils lie beyond the great dune," he said, voice low and measured. "But they are not marks of power. They are warning songs carved in sand." Lenora Vale, mounted atop Zara, the horse she had rescued from a vault mission, watched the dunes with quiet intensity. Around her, Mara and Theo rode side by side, their rifles slung across their backs. Ellis, now a seasoned scout, mapped their progress with a handheld tracker. "Any sign of Sanctum activity?" Lenora asked. Theo shook his head. Silence. Eerier than the vault. By dusk, they reached the foot of the great dune, a rampart of sand at least 100 feet high. Amadou dismounted, boots sinking in loose soil. "Here," he said, kneeling by a crescent-shaped clearing. "The sand holds memory." Ellis and Mara joined him. The clearing was ringed by canes of dried palm fronds, stuck upright like spectral reeds. In the center, sand had been scraped into 5 interlocking circles, connected by intricate line sigils of blinding complexity. Ellis knelt beside them. "These are Ward's ancient geometry to control the sun's light." Mara traced a circle, with a trembling finger, to summon solar flares, or to call the sun itself. Amadou's eyes glimmered. Older than the Almoravid Empire, a people who revered the sun as a living god, but feared its wrath. Lenora knelt before the sigils, rifle forgotten on the saddle. She felt a pulse heat building beneath the sand, like a heartbeat. "Step back," she warned. She drew a line in the sand, bisecting one of the circles. Dust rose, and for a brief moment, a low hum vibrated through the dunes. The sky brightened. A second hum answered from the heavens. Ellis grasped Lenora's arm. "We need to collapse it, or it will reach the sun." Theo and Mara sprang into action, setting charges at each circle node. Amadou chanted an incantation in Sinink, his voice rising above the hum. The caravan's elders had taught him these words, passed down across centuries to guard against what should never awaken. Lenora strapped on the dead man's trigger. She placed Zara's bridle reins gently on the ground. She wouldn't ride out. She'd stay. Ellis called over. "Ready!" A flicker of heat danced above the sigils. The sun hung low, a molten orb. Lenora's voice cracked as she flipped the trigger. A shockwave ripped through the sand. The charges detonated in unison. The ground shook. A column of sand shot upward, catching fire as it met the sun. Light scattered in 1,000 directions, dazzling white-hot. Then silence. The dunes settled. The sigils lay broken, half buried in collapsing sand. The sun set without fanfare. But in the heavens, a lone flare blossomed silver and brief before fading into twilight. Amadou wept. The warning remains. Lenora rose, sand cascading from her coat. "Then we heed it." As they rode west toward the coast, the campfire's light flickered in the desert night, painting faces carved by duty and relief. Ellis studied the fading heat haze. "How many left?" Lenora counted on her fingers. "2." Mara exhaled. "The final count." Theo nodded. "The Watcher's awakening is next." And with that, the circle pressed on, shadows moving across sands that threatened to swallow them whole. To be continued in Part 19. Part 19. The Eclipse Ritual. In the year since the Reverent Circle's archive opened its new wing, Aspen Creek had become a beacon for scholars and seekers. The Vale Institute's lanterns shone through winter's early nights, guiding caravans and students who came to study the remnants of vaults and their consequences. On the eve of the annual solar eclipse, an event Lenora had predicted decades earlier, the campus prepared a ceremonial vigil, replete with orations, music, and the unveiling of a memorial to those who had perished guarding knowledge. Lenora Vale stood at the dais before a throng of rooftops, the Institute's slate buildings framing her silhouette against the darkening sky. Her shawl, once worn across frozen ravines and storm-lashed waves, now lay draped over the podium. Behind her, 6 obelisks bore inscriptions of vault names: Red Vault, Wickham Vault, Dalton Codex, Marburg Tanks, Meridian Project, Senegal Sigils. The final obelisk remained blank, an unscripted future. She cleared her throat. The crowd fell silent, the hum of 100 conversations dying in the night air. "My friends," she began, voice steady, "tonight we gather beneath a sky reborn. In shadow, as light and darkness dance their ancient waltz. 100 years ago, I stood before you with a single vow, to bury power before it destroyed us. Tonight, that vow is still ours, but so is the promise that our work endures." A hush of wind drifted through the campus quad as the crowd turned toward the horizon. A thin crescent of moon crept across the sun, casting an otherworldly glow. Lenora stepped aside, and Mara Gambrel stepped forward, carrying a scroll sealed with the Twin Wolf crest. "In remembrance," she said, "we unveil the names of the forgotten, the wardens who perished in silence. Let their memory be a warning to all who seek to awaken what sleeps." She broke the seal, and within were 20 named scholars, soldiers, wives, children, each etched in precise calligraphy. beneath. Each name, a small glyph marking the vault they'd guarded. Ellis Rourke read a dozen aloud. Each pronouncement was met with a candle flame, as attendants lit torches around the obelisks in a living constellation of memory. As the last name was spoken, the eclipse reached totality. The world fell into a hush. Shadows sharpened. The temperature dropped. Only the torches and the pale corona of the sun glimmered. Then a tremor rolled through the ground. Not like an earthquake, but like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Whispers rippled among the crowd. Lenora grasped the podium. Her eyes, trained by decades of vigilance, scanned the horizon. A fissure opened at the far edge of the campus, a silver crack glowing with molten light. The air above it shimmered as if rippling through water. From the fissure emerged a voice, deep, resonant, and unearthly. "Children of the buried world," it echoed, "you have torn open the sky. You have sung the song of names. Now witness the dawn of Watchers." Gasps and cries filled the square. Lenora pointed behind her. "Council guards, secure the perimeter. Evacuate the informants." Mara and Theo moved to the front lines, their rifles trained on the fissure, but no solid form emerged, only spirals of light coalescing into shapes. Colossal eyes formed from starlight, drifting toward the campus like cosmic sentinels. Ellis staggered back. "They're coming. The light shapes hovered above each obelisk, bathing the names in ethereal illumination. Each warden's glyph glowed in response. Lenora realized the truth. The Watchers had answered their ritual. The obelisks had served as beacons, and now the primordials, or what remained of them, had awakened. Lightning arced across the corona. A crackling energy descended. The Watchers' voices intoned, "We are the keepers of first light. We guard the dusk. You have claimed vigilance, now claim the sacrifice." The ground beneath Lenora's feet shook more violently. She raised her voice above the tumult. "Circle, heed the vow. Deadman triggers ready. If they cross into our realm, we bury this world first." A deafening roar split the sky as the Watchers' form solidified into gargantuan silhouettes, eyes in stone, limbs of shimmering glass. They hovered at the cusp of reality, pressing against the fragile barrier between worlds. Council guards fired pistol shots that disintegrated on contact with the Watcher's light. Mara's flamethrower hissed but was absorbed. Lenora clutched the podium. "Now or never. Activate the sigil array." From beneath the quad rose 6 metal pylons, hidden vault seals, installed by the circle. At Lenora's command, Ethan Blanchard, the Institute's engineer, activated the controls. Beams of concentrated moonlight converged on each Watcher. A supernatural wail echoed. Reality flickered at the edges. Lenora stepped forward into the intersection of beams, pressing the second Deadman's trigger. A cascade of energy erupted. Watchers recoiled as the sigils glowed with lunar fire. The obelisks shattered, dissolving into motes of stardust. For a moment, all fell silent. World and Watcher alike held their breath. Then the Watchers dissolved into stellar flares that ascended. Through the fissure, the crack sealed, light returned. The eclipse waned. Lenora collapsed to her knees, weeping. Ellis knelt beside her. "It's over?" Lenora closed her eyes. "For now. The crowd emerged from hiding, chanting the names of the fallen. In that dawn of a new light, they knew the war was eternal, but so was their vigil, to be continued in Part 20, final part. Part 20. The Watchers awaken. The prairie wind carried embers of dust across Aspen Creek as dawn's first light brushed the slate roofs. The town lay silent, the scars of last night's eclipse ritual still visible in shattered obelisk fragments. And scorched earth. The Reverend Circle's council had convened in the Institute's central hall, but Lenora Vale stood alone at the window, watching horizons where sky met land. Ellis Rourke approached, notebook in hand. "We lost half the perimeter. Tower's 6 sentinels gone. But the Watchers are gone too." Lenora didn't turn. Gone for now. But the fissure reopened once. It can reopen again. She paused. We'll need a new guard. Ellis looked at her. What do you mean? Lenora stepped back from the window. The Watchers were first. Wardens, architects of vaults, bound by cosmic law. We acted as late vassals. Now the Watchers' spark has reignited. We must become the new Watchers. Ellis's eyes widened. You mean what we swore never to be? Lenora nodded. Guardians. Not just of secrets, but of reality's threshold. The Circle's final assembly convened at the Veil Institute. Council members, scholars, forgers, aquanauts stood in a vast chamber lit by dawn's glow through arched windows. At the far end, the last blank obelisk had been erected. It awaited inscription. Crow McAllister spoke first. His voice carried the weight of decades. We've buried power 7 times. We've battled beasts, viruses, and storms. We faced elder minds in darkness. Now we face the responsibility of vigilance beyond vaults. Mara Gambrel followed. The Watchers showed us their might. But we showed them our resolve. We stood between their realm and ours. We can do more. Ellis stepped forward. But how? Where do we stand watch? Lenora joined them at the obelisk, unsealed scroll in hand. We inscribe the vow here. We dedicate this tower to perpetual guardianship. Each of us will stand sentinel rotating watch upon the border between worlds. She broke the seal on the scroll. Read aloud. Vigilant Circle, seated between vault and void, hereby bind ourselves beneath the eternal name. We are Watchers. We guard the gates that should remain closed. We bear witness to power we refuse to wield. We stand watch always as long as vaults remain buried and Watchers must awaken. Silence followed, broken only by the rustle of cloak and breath. Lenora dipped her hand in ink and pressed it against the obelisk's base. One by one, council members joined, marking the stone with the Reverent Circle's seal. Years passed. Aspen Creek grew into a city of sentinels, corridors of archives, and watchtowers on every horizon rim. The Veil Institute became the Veil Sanctuary, a compound of stone and steel where the Circle trained new scouts, housed artifacts, and monitored ley lines of power beneath the earth. Lenora was forever present, though rarely seen. Her office became a shrine of memory and maps. Her voice oddly present in lectures, recordings, and the annual vigil echoed through halls like a guiding star. On the 10th anniversary of the eclipse ritual, she led the first official rotation of watch. 8 towers, one for each vault and Watcher encounter, stood at cardinal points around the globe. The Sentinels of Red Valley, Wickham, Dalton, Marburg, Meridian, Senegal, Isla, and Eclipse. In each, a lone Watcher Circle member stood vigil. Beneath the lens of a ritual lens, scanning the horizon for fissures, signs, or songs that might herald another awakening. In Aspen Creek's tower, Lenora herself watched. The dawn light shivered across the plains. The winds whispered in the grasses. Below, crowds gathered for the dawn ceremony. Above, she stood silent, rifle slung and alive with augmented senses. Her eyes reflected the world she had saved and would save again. As the sun rose, she spoke into her recorder. I see shadows at the fringe of the world. I feel currents beneath the crust. I remember the names lost, the vaults sealed, and the Watchers first awakened. I vow this. I will stand between the sleepers and the woken. I will watch. I will wait, and I will never turn away. She sealed the message, and as the sun edged higher, there was a faint hum beneath her feet, a heartbeat of worlds in balance. The Watcher's vow escalated into legend. And in that legend, Lenora Vale, the Circle's founder and final sentinel, found her true calling. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.